The knife slipped from Brielle's hand and clattered against the marble floor of her empty kitchen, a hairline fracture spreading across the tile like a vein of lightning. And she thought distantly that this was the third thing she had broken this week since Thomas died. The funeral had been yesterday. The casseroles from well-meaning neighbors still crowded her refrigerator, their plastic wrap catching the late afternoon light that filtered through curtains she hadn't opened in days. She was 26 years old and a widow, a word that tasted like ash in her mouth every time someone said it with that particular tone of pity that made her want to scream. She bent to retrieve the knife, her dark hair falling forward to curtain her face, and that was when she heard the sound from her backyard. A thump, heavy and wet, followed by a rasping breath that seemed to claw its way through the air. Brielle froze, her fingers wrapped around the knife handle, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs with an intensity that surprised her. She hadn't felt much of anything in 2 months, not since the drunk driver had turned her husband into a memory and a gravestone. The sound came again, weaker this time, and she found herself moving toward the back door without consciously deciding to do so. The rational part of her brain whispered that this was stupid, that she should call the police, but that part had grown very quiet lately. What did it matter anyway? The worst had already happened. What was left to fear? The October evening was cool against her skin as she stepped onto the back porch, the knife still clutched in her hand, though she held it loosely without real intention. Her yard was small, bordered by a high wooden fence that Thomas had built the summer before he died, and the shadows were already gathering in the corners where the fading sunlight couldn't reach. At first, she didn't see him. Then her eyes adjusted, and she realized the shadow sprawled beneath her oak tree was a man. He lay on his side in the fallen leaves, one pale hand pressed against his abdomen where something dark and wet had soaked through his clothes. His hair was white, impossibly white, the color of fresh snow, and it spilled across the ground like silk. Even from 15 feet away, even in the dying light, Brielle could see that his skin was the same shade as his hair, so pale it almost seemed to glow. She should have run. Every instinct screamed at her to go back inside, lock the door, pretend she had seen nothing. Instead, she walked toward him, her bare feet silent on the cool grass. When she was close enough to see his face properly, her breath caught. He was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache, all sharp angles and aristocratic features that seemed carved from marble. His eyes were closed, his jaw clenched against obvious pain, and there was something about the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself, even while bleeding out in her backyard, that spoke of immense pride and power barely contained. "Hey," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "Can you hear me?" His eyes opened, and Brielle nearly fell backward. They were crimson, the deep red of arterial blood, with no white visible at all. They fixed on her face with an intensity that made her feel pinned in place, a butterfly under glass. "You should go inside." His voice was cultured, accented in a way she couldn't place, and despite the obvious agony he was in, it held absolute authority. "Lock your doors. Forget you saw me." "You're bleeding to death in my yard," Brielle said, and was surprised to find her voice steady. "I'm not going to just leave you here. I'm already dead, little widow." His lips curved in something that might have been a smile if it hadn't been so pained. "Have been for 5 centuries. This is merely a temporary inconvenience." The words should have sounded insane. They didn't. Brielle looked at his white skin, his red eyes, the way his canine teeth were just slightly too long and sharp when his lips pulled back. She looked at the wound in his side that was clearly mortal, but from which he still spoke with such clarity. "You're a vampire," she said. "Yes." He watched her carefully, as though waiting for her to scream or run. "And I'm in rather desperate circumstances, I'm afraid. There was a disagreement with another of my kind, a matter of territory and old grievances. He caught me during the day while I was weakened, stabbed me with a blade dipped in dead man's blood, a substance quite toxic to my kind." He paused, his jaw tightening. "It's spreading through my system. I need blood to heal, pure blood from a willing donor, or I will slip into a death sleep that may last decades if I wake at all." "How much blood?" Brielle asked, those crimson eyes widened slightly. "You would consider it? You're not afraid?" "I'm terrified," she admitted, "but you're dying, and I'm tired of watching things die while I do nothing." The words came out more raw than she intended, and she saw understanding flicker across his pale features. "Your husband," he said quietly. "The death is recent. I can smell the grief on you like perfume." Brielle flinched but didn't look away. "2 months ago, car accident. He died instantly, they said. I wasn't there. I was at home making dinner and he was dying, and I didn't even know until the police knocked on my door." The vampire was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "My name is Dorian Yarosov. I was the vampire king of the Eastern Territories, though I suspect my throne has already been claimed by whoever orchestrated this attack. If you help me, I will be in your debt, and the debt of a vampire king is no small thing." "Brielle Pemberton," she replied, "and I don't want anything in return. I just—" She trailed off, not sure how to explain the hollow feeling inside her, the way she had been moving through her life like a ghost for weeks, how this moment was the first time she had felt truly present since Thomas died. "How do we do this?" Dorian studied her face, and something shifted in his expression, a softness creeping in around the edges of his pain. "You would need to make a small cut here." He gestured weakly to his wrist, "and allow me to drink directly. It is more efficient than any other method, and I am too weak to be delicate." Brielle looked down at the knife still in her hand. The same knife she had been using to cut vegetables for a dinner she would eat alone. The same knife she had broken her favorite cutting board with yesterday in a fit of rage she hadn't seen coming. She pressed the blade against her left wrist, where the blue veins showed through her skin like rivers on a map. "Wait," Dorian said sharply, and despite his weakness, there was such command in the word that her hand stilled automatically. "You need to understand what you're offering. When a human freely gives their blood to one of my kind, when it is a gift rather than taken by force, it creates a bond. You will feel my emotions, and I will feel yours. In my weakened state, that bond will form quickly and may be quite strong. It is not something to be entered into lightly." "Will it hurt me?" Brielle asked. "No, I would never take enough to harm you, but you will be connected to me, little widow, and I to you. That connection does not easily break." She should have hesitated. She should have asked more questions, demanded details, done anything other than what she did next. But Brielle was so tired of being alone, so exhausted from the weight of grief that pressed down on her like a physical thing, that the thought of being connected to anyone, even a dying vampire king, felt like a lifeline being thrown to a drowning woman. She drew the knife across her wrist in one quick motion. The pain was sharp and immediate, blood welling up in bright red drops that rolled down her pale skin. Dorian's eyes fixed on her wrist with an intensity that should have frightened her, and when he reached for her, his hand trembling, she didn't pull away. He brought her wrist to his mouth, and Brielle felt the first touch of his lips against her skin like an electrical shock. Then his tongue traced the cut, and the sensation that went through her was so intense she gasped. It wasn't pain, not exactly, but something that skirted the edge of it, pleasure and discomfort tangled together until she couldn't tell them apart. Dorian drank, and Brielle felt the pull of it, the way her blood flowed from her body into his. She also felt something else, a presence that wasn't her own, touching the edges of her consciousness like a tentative hand reaching out in the dark. His pain hit her first, waves of it that made her bite her lip to keep from crying out, and underneath that, fear and rage and bone-deep exhaustion that resonated with her own weariness in a way that made her chest tighten. She didn't know how long it lasted. Time seemed to stretch and compress, and she felt herself growing lightheaded, the world tilting sideways. Just when she thought she might faint, Dorian pulled back, his tongue sweeping across her wrist one final time. The bleeding stopped, and when she looked down, she could see the cut was already beginning to close, knitting itself together far faster than should have been possible. "Vampire saliva," Dorian said, his voice stronger now. "It has healing properties." He sat up slowly, one hand still pressed against the wound in his side, but the deathly pallor was already fading from his features. His eyes, when they met hers, held an expression she couldn't quite read. "You saved my life, Brielle Pemberton. That is twice now that I find myself in your debt." "Twice?" She swayed slightly, and his hand shot out to steady her, his fingers cool against her arm. "Once for the blood, and once for not screaming when you saw me. Many would have. Most, in fact." He helped her to her feet with surprising gentleness. "You should go inside. Rest. The blood loss will leave you weak for a few hours, though not dangerously so. I took only what I needed. What about you? Brielle asked. That wound will heal now that I have proper sustenance. It will take time, but I am no longer in danger of the death sleep. He released her arm reluctantly, and she felt the absence of his touch like a cold wind. I should leave. Others may come looking for me, and I would not put you in danger. Others like whoever did this to you? Dorian's expression darkened. Yes. My second in command, a vampire named Constantine, has apparently decided he would prefer to be first. He orchestrated an attack during the daylight hours when I was at my weakest, using weapons specifically designed to incapacitate our kind. If he knew I had survived, he would send others to finish the task. Then don't leave, Brielle said. The words came out before she could think them through, but once they were spoken, she didn't take them back. Stay here, at least until you're healed. He won't think to look for the Vampire King in a suburban widow's backyard. You would shelter me? Dorian shook his head slowly. You don't know what you're offering, Brielle. I am not a tame thing. My kind are predators by nature, and I have ruled through strength and, when necessary, violence for longer than your country has existed. I am dangerous. So is grief, Brielle replied quietly. And I've been living with that for 2 months. I think I can handle a vampire for a few days. She met his crimson gaze steadily. Besides, you said it yourself. We're bonded now. I can feel you here. She pressed a hand to her chest, just over her heart. Your pain and your anger, and something else, something that feels like loneliness, I think. You're as alone as I am. Dorian went very still. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, and Brielle wondered if she had overstepped, if she had insulted him somehow. Then he inclined his head in a gesture that was almost a bow, graceful despite his injury. Very well, little widow. I accept your offer, and I will repay this kindness when I am able, but you must promise me something in return. What? If I tell you to run, you run. If I tell you to hide, you hide. My world is not like yours, and the dangers in it are very real. You must trust me to know when those dangers are too great. His voice softened slightly. I would not see you harmed for your generosity. I promise, Brielle said, and felt the words settle into place between them, another thread in the bond that was forming, whether she understood it or not. She helped him inside, his weight against her side a reminder of how solid he was, despite the ethereal quality of his appearance. The house that had felt so empty and cold for weeks suddenly seemed warmer with another presence in it, even if that presence was an injured vampire king who could probably kill her with one hand if he chose to. Dorian settled onto her couch with a grace that spoke of centuries of practice in moving through the world as though he owned it. His wound was still bleeding, though more slowly now, and Brielle found herself kneeling beside him with a first aid kit, before remembering that normal medical supplies probably wouldn't help much. The dead man's blood needs to be drawn out, Dorian explained, his voice tight with pain. It's a poison to my system, and while your blood will help me fight it, the process will be unpleasant. I'll need to let the wound bleed freely to clear it, then drink again to heal properly. How much more blood will you need? Brielle asked. Not from you. You've given enough, and I won't risk weakening you further. He closed his eyes, his jaw clenching. I'll hunt tomorrow night once I have the strength. For now, I simply need to endure. Brielle watched him for a moment, then made a decision. She went to her kitchen and returned with a large bowl and towels. Then let's get that poison out of you. The process was messy and clearly agonizing for Dorian, though he bore it with a stoicism that was almost frightening. The blood that poured from his wound was darker than it should have been, tinged with something that looked like black oil, and the smell of it made Brielle's stomach turn. But she stayed beside him, changing out the bowl when it filled, wiping away the excess with towels that she would probably have to burn later. Through it all, she felt his pain echoing through the bond between them, a constant ache that made her own body hurt in sympathy. But she also felt his surprise, and underneath that, a growing warmth that felt almost like gratitude, though it was tinged with something more complex, something she didn't have a name for. When the blood finally ran clear, Dorian opened his eyes and looked at her with an expression that was almost vulnerable. Thank you, he said quietly. I have not had anyone tend to my wounds in a very long time. My position requires a certain invulnerability. To show weakness is to invite challenges. That sounds exhausting, Brielle said, settling back on her heels. Always having to be strong, never being allowed to just be hurt. It is the way of my world. Dorian shifted slightly, testing the wound. But perhaps I have grown weary of it. 500 years is a long time to wear a crown. Is that how old you are? 500? 537 to be precise. I was turned in 1489, in what is now Russia. I was a minor nobleman then, fourth son with no prospects, until a vampire lord decided I would make a useful addition to his court. Dorian's lips curved in a bitter smile. I killed him 50 years later and took his territory. Such is the way of advancement among my kind. Brielle absorbed this information, trying to wrap her mind around the idea that the man on her couch had lived through centuries she had only read about in history books. Do you regret it? Being turned? Some days. He looked at her, his crimson eyes softening. And some days not. Immortality is a gift and a curse in equal measure. You have time to learn everything, experience everything, but you also have time to lose everything. Everyone you care about withers and dies while you remain unchanged. It is a particular kind of loneliness. I know something about loneliness, Brielle said quietly. She stood, gathering the bloody towels. I should clean these up, and you should rest. There's a guest room upstairs, but I'm guessing you'll need somewhere darker to sleep during the day. The basement would be ideal, if you have one. Vampires don't burst into flames at the first touch of sunlight, the way stories suggest, but it weakens us considerably, and after today, I cannot afford to be weak. I have a basement. Thomas used it as a workshop, so it's full of his tools and half-finished projects. But there's a couch down there. Her voice caught slightly on her husband's name, and she felt Dorian's attention sharpen on her, felt his concern through the bond like a warm hand on her shoulder. Tell me about him, Dorian said, if you wish to. Sometimes it helps to speak of the dead. Brielle paused in the doorway, the bloody towels clutched in her hands. She hadn't talked about Thomas, not really, not since the funeral where she had stood dry-eyed and numb while people offered condolences that felt like empty words. But something about Dorian's presence, about the bond that let her feel his genuine interest and compassion, made the words come easier. He was kind, she said finally. That's the first thing anyone would tell you about Thomas Pemberton. He was the kind of person who stopped to help strangers change flat tires, who remembered everyone's birthday, who couldn't walk past an animal shelter without wanting to adopt every dog. She smiled despite the tears that were starting to blur her vision. We met in college. He was studying to be a teacher, and I was working on my art degree. He saw me struggling to carry a canvas across campus in the wind, and he just appeared and helped. Didn't ask for anything in return, didn't even ask for my number. I had to track him down later to thank him. He sounds like a good man, Dorian said quietly. He was. He was the best man I've ever known, and he loved me in this uncomplicated way that I didn't know existed outside of movies. He used to leave me notes on the bathroom mirror in the morning before he went to work. Stupid things like, "You're beautiful," or "Don't forget to eat lunch," or "I love you more than coffee," which was saying something because he really loved coffee. Brielle's voice cracked. The last note said, "Can't wait to see you tonight." But he never came home. She felt Dorian's emotions surge through the bond, a wave of sympathy so strong it nearly knocked her over. When she looked at him, she was startled to see something like pain in his ancient eyes. "I am sorry for your loss," he said, and the formal words somehow didn't sound empty when he spoke them. "To love and lose is the deepest pain I know, and I have known many kinds of pain in my long existence." "Have you loved?" Brielle asked. "In all those centuries?" "Once," Dorian admitted. "A very long time ago. She was human, like you, and she gave me 3 years of happiness before illness took her. This was before modern medicine, before we knew how to fight such things. I tried to turn her, to save her, but she refused. She said she would rather die human than live forever as a monster." His expression went distant. "I respected her choice, but I have not allowed myself to care so deeply since. It is easier to rule when one's heart is not vulnerable." Brielle didn't know what to say to that, so she simply nodded and went to deal with the bloody towels. By the time she returned, Dorian was standing, testing his weight, and she could see that while he was still injured, He was far from the dying creature she had found in her yard. She showed him to the basement, apologizing for the clutter, but Dorian seemed unconcerned. He settled onto the old couch that Thomas had kept down there for when he needed a break from his projects, and Brielle tried not to think about how strange it was to see a vampire king in her dead husband's space. "I'll leave you to rest," she said, backing toward the stairs. "If you need anything—" "Brielle," Dorian's voice stopped her. "Thank you. For your blood, your shelter, and your stories. You have given me more tonight than you know." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and climbed the stairs. Once in her own bedroom, she collapsed onto the bed, still fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. She should have been frightened. She should have been questioning her sanity, wondering what she had invited into her home. Instead, she felt the bond between them like a golden thread, connecting her to the vampire in her basement, and for the first time since Thomas died, she didn't feel completely alone. She woke to darkness and the smell of coffee. For a disorienting moment, she thought Thomas was home, that the last 2 months had been a nightmare. But then reality crashed back, and she remembered. Thomas was gone, and there was a vampire in her basement. Except when she went downstairs, she found Dorian in her kitchen, moving with the ease of someone who had spent centuries learning to navigate human spaces. He had showered somehow, his white hair damp and hanging loose around his shoulders, and he had changed into clothes that must have been hidden somewhere on his person, because they certainly weren't Thomas's style. He wore all black, simple but clearly expensive, and he moved with a predatory grace that made her kitchen feel too small. "You made coffee," Brielle said, her voice rough with sleep. "I remember how to perform basic human tasks, even if I no longer require them myself." Dorian poured her a cup with practiced ease. "You slept for 13 hours. It's evening now. I thought you might appreciate waking to familiar comforts." Brielle accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "How's your wound?" "Healing, but slowly. I need to hunt tonight, to take blood from a fresh source. It will accelerate the process considerably." He watched her face carefully, as though gauging her reaction. "I thought I should tell you, rather than simply disappearing. Where will you go?" "There are places in the city where humans gather who are aware of our kind. Blood dens, some call them. Humans who offer themselves freely in exchange for money or the experience itself. It's a transaction, nothing more, and it's safer for both parties than hunting randomly." "That's really a thing?" Brielle asked, surprised. Dorian's lips curved in something that might have been amusement. "Vampires have existed alongside humans for millennia, Brielle. We've developed certain systems to ensure mutual survival. The blood dens are one such system. They're regulated by vampire law, and the humans who work there do so voluntarily and are well compensated." "I guess that makes sense." She sipped her coffee, studying him over the rim of the mug. "Will it be dangerous? If this Constantine is looking for you?" "Possibly. But I cannot remain weak, and I cannot survive on your blood alone without risking harm to you. The bond makes your blood particularly potent to me now, but also particularly dangerous. If I took from you too frequently, I could drain you without meaning to." He set down his own untouched cup with careful precision. "I will not let that happen." Brielle felt the truth of his words through the bond, a fierce protectiveness that startled her with its intensity. "When will you go?" "Soon, within the hour. The night is when my kind is strongest, and I need every advantage I can gather." He paused, then added, "You could come with me. To a blood den. To see my world. To understand what you've bound yourself to." Dorian moved closer, his crimson eyes intent on her face. "The bond between us is growing stronger, Brielle. You feel it, don't you? Every hour that passes, every moment we spend in close proximity, it deepens. Eventually, it will become difficult for us to be apart without discomfort. You deserve to know what that means, what my life entails." She should have said no. She should have stayed in her safe suburban house with her grief and her casseroles and her shattered life. Instead, she found herself nodding. "Okay, let me change into something more appropriate than pajamas." 20 minutes later, she was sitting in the passenger seat of a car that Dorian had apparently hidden nearby before his confrontation with Constantine, and they were driving into the city. The vehicle was sleek and black, and probably cost more than her house, and Dorian drove with the casual confidence of someone who had been navigating roads for longer than cars had existed. "Tell me about vampire politics," Brielle said as the suburbs gave way to city lights. "How does it all work?" "In theory, there are territories ruled by kings or queens, with courts of lesser vampires who owe allegiance in exchange for protection and the right to hunt within those territories. Each ruler sets their own laws, though there are certain universal codes that all our kind must follow. Don't reveal our existence to humans who aren't aware. Don't create new vampires without permission. Don't hunt children, the usual rules that keep us from being hunted to extinction." "And in practice?" Dorian's expression darkened. "In practice, it's a constant game of power and politics. Alliances shift, territories are contested, and rulers are overthrown when they show weakness. I have held the Eastern Territories for 3 centuries through a combination of strength, strategy, and the willingness to do what others would not. But it appears even that wasn't enough to prevent betrayal from within my own court." "This Constantine," Brielle said, "how long has he been with you?" 80 years. He was a young vampire when I took him in, barely a century old and struggling to find his place in our world. I made him powerful, gave him authority and respect, and this is how he repays me." The anger in Dorian's voice was cold and controlled, but Brielle could feel the hurt beneath it through their bond. "I should have seen it coming. I have lived long enough to know that trust is a luxury I cannot afford." "You trusted him anyway," Brielle said quietly. "Yes, I suppose I did." Dorian glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. "Much as I am trusting you now, little widow, you could betray me to my enemies, lead them right to me. Yet I find myself believing you won't." "I won't," Brielle said, and meant it. The bond between them made lying impossible anyway. He would feel the deception immediately. "I don't know much about vampire politics, but I know that what happened to you was wrong. You saved your second in command, gave him everything, and he tried to kill you for it. That's not power politics. That's just cruelty." "Welcome to my world," Dorian said dryly, but she felt his gratitude through the bond, warm and genuine. The blood den was not what Brielle expected. She had pictured something dark and gothic, all shadows and velvet curtains, but instead, Dorian led her into what looked like an upscale nightclub in the heart of the city's downtown district. Music pulsed through the air, and beautiful people in expensive clothes mingled near a bar that served drinks in shades of red that might or might not have been wine. "The main floor is for show," Dorian explained, his hand settling on the small of her back to guide her through the crowd. "Humans who are curious about vampires but not ready to commit. The real business happens below." He led her to a door, guarded by a massive man whose eyes reflected light like a cat's when he looked at them. "Lord Yarosov," the man said, bowing his head in clear respect. "We had heard you were indisposed." "Rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated," Dorian replied coolly. "Though I would appreciate it if you kept my presence here to yourself, Marcus." "Of course, my lord. Your secrets are safe with me." Marcus opened the door, revealing stairs that led down into warm, dim light. "The usual amenities are available, and there are several donors on duty tonight who would be honored to serve you." They descended into a space that was much more in line with Brielle's expectations. The lighting was soft and intimate, the decor rich with dark woods and deep red fabrics. Private booths lined the walls, curtained off for privacy, and she could hear quiet conversations mixed with occasional sighs that made her cheeks heat. A woman approached them, inhumanly beautiful, with silver hair and eyes that swirled like mercury. She was clearly a vampire, moving with that same predatory grace that Dorian possessed. "Lord Yarosov," she said, her voice musical, "this is an unexpected pleasure. We had heard that Constantine was ruling the Eastern Territories now." "Constantine overstepped," Dorian said, his voice taking on the cold edge of absolute authority, "and he will answer for it when I am ready to collect that debt. For now, I require a donor, Celine, someone discreet." Celine's eyes flicked to Brielle, curiosity bright in them. "And your companion? Is she a donor as well, or something else?" The vampire inhaled deeply, her eyes widening. "You're bonded to her, a blood bond and a fresh one. How fascinating." "She is under my protection," Dorian said, and the warning in his voice was clear. "As is her privacy. I trust you understand." Of course, my lord. Celine bowed her head, though her smile suggested she understood far more than Dorian probably wanted. I'll send someone to you immediately. Booth 7 is available. Dorian guided Brielle to the indicated booth, his hand still on her back, and she was grateful for the touch, for the physical reminder that she wasn't alone in this strange underworld. Once they were seated in the private space, curtained off from the rest of the room, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Are you all right? Dorian asked, his crimson eyes searching her face. I think so. It's just a lot to take in. Your world is so different from mine. Yes, and I'm asking you to be part of it, at least temporarily, by sheltering me. He reached out, his cool fingers brushing her cheek in a gesture that felt far too intimate for their brief acquaintance. If it's too much, tell me. I will find another way. No, Brielle said quickly. I want to help. She trailed off, not sure how to explain the feeling that had been growing inside her since she had given him her blood. The sense that this was where she was supposed to be, that this strange, dangerous vampire king needed her in a way that made her feel useful for the first time since Thomas died. Before Dorian could respond, the curtain rustled and a young man entered. He was human, Brielle could tell immediately, with warm brown skin and dark eyes that held a mixture of nervousness and excitement. He bowed to Dorian with clear respect. Lord Tio. Lord Yarosov, I'm honored to serve you tonight. My name is James, and I'm here of my own free will, consenting to donate blood in exchange for the agreed-upon compensation. The formal words seemed ritualistic, and Dorian responded with equal formality. I accept your consent, James, and I promise to take only what I need and leave you unharmed. James settled onto the cushioned bench beside Dorian, tilting his head to expose his neck, and Brielle found herself looking away, feeling like she was intruding on an intimate moment. But through the bond, she felt Dorian's emotions, and there was nothing intimate about them. He fed with the clinical efficiency of someone performing a necessary task, taking what he needed quickly and healing the wound before releasing the young man with a substantial payment and a word of thanks. When they were alone again, Dorian turned to her. I know that was difficult to watch. It wasn't what I expected, Brielle admitted. It seemed so transactional. Because it was. I don't love James. I don't even particularly desire him beyond the biological need for blood. What we shared was a business arrangement, nothing more. Dorian moved closer, his eyes intense on hers. The bond you and I share is entirely different, Brielle. When I took your blood, it was freely given, offered in compassion and trust. That creates something far more powerful than any transaction ever could. What exactly does the bond mean? Brielle asked. You said we'd be connected, but how connected? I can feel your emotions as you feel mine. In time, we may be able to sense each other's location to know when the other is in danger. If the bond grows strong enough, we may even be able to communicate without words, mind to mind. He paused, his expression becoming serious. And there is one other thing you should know. Blood bonds of this nature often develop into something more. Love is not uncommon between bonded pairs. Brielle's heart stuttered. Love? I'm not saying it's inevitable, Dorian said quickly. Only that it's possible. The emotions are already flowing between us, Brielle. You've felt my loneliness, my pain, my gratitude, and I have felt your grief, your compassion, your courage. That kind of intimacy often breeds affection, and affection can grow into something deeper. She didn't know what to say to that. Part of her wanted to protest that it was too soon, that Thomas had only been gone 2 months, that she couldn't possibly be ready to feel anything for anyone else. But another part of her, the part connected to Dorian through the golden thread of their bond, whispered that this was different, that what she felt for Thomas would always be precious, but it didn't mean she had to be alone forever. I'm not asking for anything, Dorian continued when she remained silent. I'm simply being honest about the reality of our situation. The bond will continue to grow unless we actively sever it, which would require a ritual and would be unpleasant for both of us. If you want me to leave once I'm healed, if you want to end this before it goes any further, I will understand. I don't want you to leave, Brielle said, the words coming out before she could second-guess them. Not yet. I know it's crazy, and I know I probably shouldn't feel this way. But you're right. I can feel your emotions, and they mirror mine in so many ways. You're lonely, and you're tired of being strong all the time, and you just want someone who sees you as more than a king or a threat or a monster. And I understand that because I've been feeling the same way. Everyone looks at me and sees the poor widow, the tragic young woman whose husband died too soon. No one sees just Brielle anymore. I see Brielle, Dorian said quietly. The woman who found a dying vampire in her backyard and chose compassion over fear. The woman who speaks of her dead husband with love and without bitterness. The woman who is far stronger than she knows. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch, and for a moment the curtained booth felt far too small, the space between them charged with something she wasn't ready to name. Then Dorian stood, offering her his hand with courtly grace. Come. We should return to your home before questions are asked about why I'm here with a bonded human. Selene won't spread rumors, but others may not be so discreet. The drive back to the suburbs was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Brielle watched the city lights give way to the familiar landscape of her neighborhood and tried to process everything she had learned. Vampires were real, and they had their own society with rules and politics and blood dens where humans voluntarily offered their veins. Dorian was a king, or had been, until his own second-in-command had betrayed him, and she was bonded to him, tied to him by the blood she had freely given, and that bond was growing stronger by the hour. It was insane. All of it was insane. But as they pulled into her driveway, and Dorian walked her to her door with old-fashioned protectiveness, she couldn't bring herself to regret any of it. Over the next 3 days, a rhythm developed between them. Dorian slept in the basement during the day, recovering his strength in the darkness, while Brielle worked on her art in the spare room she had converted into a studio. Thomas had encouraged her painting, had been her biggest supporter, and after his death, she hadn't been able to even look at her canvases. But now, with Dorian's presence in the house, she found herself picking up a brush again, letting color and form flow from her hands for the first time in months. In the evenings, they talked. Dorian told her stories of his long life, of courts he had visited and wars he had survived, of the slow march of history from a perspective few humans could ever imagine. He spoke of the loneliness of immortality, the way friendships withered when you outlived everyone you cared about, the strange isolation of being surrounded by other vampires who saw you as a king first and a person second, if they saw you as a person at all. Brielle, in turn, told him about her life, about growing up in a small town, about her parents who had died in a house fire when she was 20, about meeting Thomas and building a life with him that had felt safe and comfortable and good. She told him about the dreams she had shelved, the art career she had put on hold to support Thomas's teaching aspirations, the quiet contentment she had found in being a wife. "Do you resent him?" Dorian asked one night as they sat in her living room, the only light coming from the fireplace he had built for her with the practiced ease of someone who had lived through centuries without electricity. "For the dreams you set aside?" "No," Brielle said, and was surprised to find it was true. "I chose that life because I wanted to. Thomas never asked me to give up my art. If anything, he encouraged me to paint more. I was the one who decided I needed to be practical to contribute financially while he was building his career. And we were happy. That counts for something." "It counts for a great deal," Dorian agreed. He was sitting close to her on the couch, closer than strictly necessary, and she had noticed he did that more and more as the bond between them strengthened. Not touching, but near enough that she could feel the coolness of his skin, smell the faint scent of him that was like winter air, and something indefinably other. Happiness is rarer than most people realize. "Were you happy?" Brielle asked, "before Constantine's betrayal?" Dorian considered the question for a long moment. "Content, perhaps, satisfied with my power and position. But happy? No. I had everything a vampire could want: territory, wealth, respect, but I was alone in all the ways that mattered. I had subjects, not friends, allies, not companions, and certainly not anyone I could trust with vulnerability the way I find myself trusting you." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Brielle felt his emotions through the bond, a swirl of longing and fear, and something that felt dangerously close to affection. Her own feelings were becoming increasingly complicated. She still mourned Thomas, still felt the ache of his absence like a physical wound, but alongside that grief was a growing awareness of Dorian. The way his rare smiles transformed his severe features, the surprising gentleness in his hands when he helped her with small tasks, the fierce protectiveness she felt radiating from him whenever she mentioned being nervous or afraid. "What happens when you're fully healed?" she asked, voicing the question that had been bothering her. "Will you go back to your territories, challenge Constantine?" "Yes," Dorian said. "I cannot let his betrayal stand. If I do, every vampire in my former territories will see me as weak, and others will follow Constantine's example. I must reclaim what is mine, both for my own sake and for the stability of the vampire world. An usurper on the throne will lead to chaos and bloodshed." "Will you kill him?" "Most likely. Vampire justice is swift and permanent. Constantine attempted regicide. The penalty for that is death." Dorian's crimson eyes studied her face. "Does that bother you?" Brielle thought about it honestly. A month ago, the idea of someone she knew casually discussing murder would have horrified her. But she had seen Dorian's world now, understood the brutal logic that governed it. "I think it should bother me more than it does. But he tried to kill you, and you're important to me. So no, I don't think I can judge you for doing what you need to do to survive and rule." Something shifted in Dorian's expression, softening it in ways she hadn't seen before. "You are remarkable, Brielle Pemberton. You adapt to my world with a grace that astounds me." "Or maybe I'm just really good at denial," she said with a weak laugh. "This time last week, I thought vampires were fiction. Now I'm sheltering a vampire king and telling him it's okay to commit murder. My therapist would have a field day." "You're seeing a therapist?" "I was supposed to start next week. After the funeral, everyone kept telling me I needed to talk to someone about my grief. I made an appointment to get them to stop bothering me, but I'm not sure I'm going to keep it now. How do I explain any of this to a human therapist who doesn't know vampires exist?" "You don't," Dorian said simply. "You tell them what they need to know and keep the rest to yourself. It's what I've been doing for centuries." "That sounds exhausting." "It is." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, cool and gentle. "But it's easier when you have someone who knows the truth, someone you don't have to hide from." Brielle's breath caught. The gesture was tender, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with the bond and everything to do with the way he was looking at her. "Dorian." A sound from outside cut her off, glass breaking, followed by a thump against the side of the house. Dorian was on his feet instantly, all softness gone from his expression, replaced by the cold calculation of a predator sensing danger. "Get to the basement," he said, his voice hard with command. "Now, Brielle." "What's happening?" "They've found me. I can smell them, 3 vampires, maybe 4. Go, now." Brielle wanted to argue, but she remembered her promise to obey if he told her to run or hide. She bolted for the basement stairs just as her front window exploded inward, shards of glass scattering across her living room floor like deadly rain. From the top of the basement stairs, she looked back and saw them. 3 vampires, all pale and beautiful and terrible, moving with inhuman speed. And Dorian, standing between them and her, his body coiled with lethal intent. "Well, well," one of the intruders said, his voice carrying an accent similar to Dorian's. "The rumors were true. The great Dorian Urasov, hiding in a human suburb like a wounded animal. How the mighty have fallen." "Dmitri," Dorian said, his voice cold as ice. "I should have known Constantine would send his favorite dog to finish what he started. Tell me, did he promise you my territories if you succeeded? Or are you simply too stupid to realize he'll kill you the moment you're no longer useful?" The vampire named Dmitri laughed, but there was an edge to it. Brave words for someone who's outnumbered and still recovering from dead man's blood poisoning. "Constantine sends his regards, by the way. He's quite comfortable on your throne." "Then he'll die in it," Dorian replied. "But first, I'll deal with you." What happened next was too fast for Brielle's human eyes to fully track. Dorian moved like liquid shadow, impossibly quick, and suddenly one of the intruders was on the floor, his neck bent at an unnatural angle. But there were still 2 others, and they attacked in tandem, forcing Dorian back toward the stairs where Brielle stood frozen in horror. She saw blood, Dorian's blood, dark against his pale skin, and felt his pain spike through the bond hard enough to make her gasp. He was still injured, still weakened from the dead man's blood, and these vampires were fresh and ready to kill. Without thinking, Brielle did the only thing she could think of. She ran back up the stairs, grabbed the knife from her kitchen block, the same knife she had used to cut her wrist 3 days ago, and before she could talk herself out of it, she sliced her palm open. "Dorian!" she shouted, holding up her bleeding hand. The effect was immediate and dramatic. All 3 vampires froze, their eyes locking onto her hand, pupils dilating at the scent of fresh blood. But Dorian's reaction was different. He moved faster than she had ever seen him move, crossing the space between them in a blur, his hand wrapping around her bleeding palm. "Mine," he snarled at the other vampires, and his voice was nothing human, all monster and rage. "She is mine, and any who touch her will face me." The bond between them surged, and Brielle felt power flowing through it, her blood giving Dorian strength when he needed it most. He released her hand and turned on the remaining vampires with renewed ferocity, and this time there was no question of the outcome. He was faster, stronger, unstoppable, and within moments both intruders were on the floor with their throats torn out. In the sudden silence that followed, Dorian stood in the wreckage of Brielle's living room, breathing hard, his white hair stained with blood that wasn't all his own. When he turned to look at her, his crimson eyes were wild, more vampire than man. "You should have stayed hidden," he said, his voice rough. "You could have been killed." "So could you," Brielle shot back, cradling her bleeding hand against her chest. "I felt you dying through the bond, Dorian. I couldn't just hide while that happened." Something in his expression cracked, and suddenly he was in front of her, his hands framing her face with desperate gentleness. "You magnificent, foolish woman, you saved me again." "I'm getting good at it," she said, trying for humor despite the adrenaline making her shake. "Maybe I should make it a career, professional vampire king-saver." Dorian made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob, and then he was kissing her, his mouth cold and demanding against hers. Brielle made a startled noise but didn't pull away. Instead, she found herself kissing him back, pouring all her fear and relief and the complicated tangle of feelings she had been trying to ignore into the press of their lips. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dorian rested his forehead against hers. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "That was inappropriate. You are vulnerable, and I am your guest, and I should not have—" "Shut up," Brielle said, cutting him off. "Just this once. Stop being noble and let me have this, okay? I know it's too soon. I know Thomas has only been gone 2 months, and I know this is probably some kind of trauma response mixed with supernatural bonding, but I don't care. Right now, in this moment, I want to feel something other than grief and fear, and you make me feel alive again." Dorian's hands tightened on her face. "Brielle, I'm not asking for forever," she continued. "I'm not asking for declarations of love. I'm just asking for this, whatever this is, for as long as it lasts. Can you give me that?" For a long moment, he simply looked at her, his ancient eyes searching hers. Then he nodded slowly. "Yes, but first we need to leave. Dmitri and his companions were sent by Constantine, which means more will follow when these 3 don't report back. Your home is no longer safe." "Where will we go?" "I have holdings throughout the territories, safe houses that even Constantine doesn't know about. We'll go to ground, let me heal fully, and then," his expression hardened, "and then I will take back what is mine." They left within the hour, Brielle throwing clothes into a suitcase, while Dorian made phone calls to allies she didn't know he had. She looked around her house one last time before they departed, at the broken window and the bloodstains on her floor, at the life she had built with Thomas that was now irrevocably changed. "I can never come back here, can I?" she asked quietly. Dorian stood beside her, solid and steady. "Not while Constantine rules. He knows about you now, knows that you're bonded to me. He'll see you as a weakness to exploit or a tool to use against me." "I'm sorry, Brielle. I brought danger to your doorstep." "You also brought me back to life," she said, surprising herself with the admission. "I was dying here, Dorian, slowly suffocating under the weight of grief and loneliness. At least now I'm living again, even if it's dangerous." They drove through the night, leaving the city behind and heading into rural areas Brielle had never seen. Dorian's safe house turned out to be a restored Victorian mansion set on 20 acres of private land, hidden behind gates and wards that he assured her would keep out any vampire without a personal invitation. The house was beautiful in a Gothic way, all dark wood and rich fabrics, and Brielle found herself thinking that it suited Dorian far better than her suburban home ever had. This was a place built for vampire royalty, for someone who had lived through centuries and collected wealth and power like other people collected photographs. "There's a full staff," Dorian explained as he led her through the grand entrance hall. "Human, but aware of what I am, and well compensated for their discretion. They'll see to whatever needs you have and ask no questions about your presence here." "How long will we stay?" "A week? Perhaps 2. Long enough for me to fully heal and make contact with loyalists in my court. Constantine's coup was successful because he caught me off guard, but there are still vampires in the Eastern Territories who would rather see me on the throne than him. I need to remind them that I'm very much alive, and coming for what's mine." He showed her to a bedroom that was larger than her entire kitchen back home, with a 4-poster bed and windows that overlooked manicured gardens. "Rest," he said gently. "You've been through a great deal tonight." But Brielle didn't want to rest. She didn't want to be alone with her thoughts, with the memory of vampires crashing through her window and Dorian bleeding while protecting her. Instead, she caught his hand before he could leave, her fingers tangling with his cool ones. "Stay," she said. "Please, just stay with me." Dorian's expression softened in that way she was coming to treasure, the vulnerability he showed only to her. "Are you certain?" "I'm certain that I don't want to be alone right now. Everything else we can figure out as we go." He nodded and settled into an armchair near the window, clearly intending to keep watch while she slept. But Brielle shook her head and patted the bed beside her. "I mean, really stay. I'm not asking for anything more than your presence, Dorian. I just need to know you're close." For a moment, she thought he would refuse, would fall back on propriety and the vast gulf of years and experience between them. Then he kicked off his shoes with a sigh that sounded almost relieved, and stretched out on top of the covers beside her, careful to keep space between them, even as his mere presence soothed something raw and frightened inside her. "Tell me more about the woman you loved," Brielle said, turning on her side to face him. "The human one, from centuries ago." Dorian was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "Her name was Katerina. She was the daughter of a merchant, and I met her in a marketplace in what is now Ukraine. I was still relatively young then, only a century turned, and I thought I knew everything about being a vampire. She taught me I knew nothing." "How?" "She wasn't afraid of me, not even when I revealed what I was. She looked at me and saw a person, not a monster. We had 3 years together, and they were the happiest of my long existence. She aged during those years humans do, even in their 20s, and I watched her mortality like a clock counting down. When she fell ill, when the fever took hold and wouldn't let go, I begged her to let me turn her, promised her eternity at my side. But she refused," Brielle said quietly. "She said she loved me, but loved her humanity more, that she would rather have an mortal life lived fully than an immortal existence as something other than herself. I held her while she died, felt her heartbeat slow and stop, and I swore I would never put myself through that pain again." Dorian's eyes met Brielle's, dark with old sorrow. "I kept that promise for 300 years, until a widow cut her wrist open to save my life, and I found myself caring again, despite every vow I had made." Brielle's breath caught. "Dorian, I know it's too soon," he said, echoing her earlier words. "I know you're grieving, and I know the bond complicates everything. But I want you to understand what you've done to me, Brielle. You've made me feel hope again, made me believe that perhaps immortality doesn't have to mean loneliness, and that terrifies me more than any knife or betrayal ever could." She didn't know what to say to that, so she did the only thing that felt right. She closed the distance between them and kissed him again, slower this time, gentler, a promise of possibility rather than desperation. When they broke apart, she settled against his chest, her ear over the place where his heart beat slowly, so much slower than a human's. We'll figure it out, she whispered. Somehow. Together. Together, Dorian agreed, and his arms came around her, cool and strong and utterly safe. The next week passed in a strange sort of suspended reality. During the days, while Dorian slept in the mansion's basement chambers specially designed to block all sunlight, Brielle explored the house and grounds. She painted in the conservatory, setting up an impromptu studio among the plants, and found that inspiration came easier here than it had in months. Her work grew darker, more dramatic, influenced by everything she had seen and experienced, but there was also a beauty to it that hadn't been there before. At night, Dorian made calls and met with vampires who arrived under cover of darkness, ancient creatures with old-world names and faces that had seen things Brielle could barely imagine. They pledged their loyalty to him, these vampires, swearing in languages she didn't understand that they would stand with their true king when the time came to reclaim his throne. Through it all, the bond between Brielle and Dorian grew stronger. She could feel his emotions as clearly as her own now, could sense his location in the house, even when she couldn't see him. And once, when she had cut her finger on a paintbrush, she had felt his concern spike across whatever distance separated them, and he had appeared in the conservatory within moments. "Ah, I felt your pain," he said, examining her finger with intense focus. "Through the bond. It pulled at me." "It's just a small cut," Brielle assured him, but she was touched by his concern, by the way he carefully cleaned and bandaged the wound with hands that could kill, but chose gentleness instead. They didn't discuss what was growing between them, the feelings that were becoming increasingly difficult to deny. Instead, they existed in a space of careful touches and meaningful looks, of conversations that lasted until dawn, of stolen kisses that left Brielle breathless and wanting more but afraid to ask for it. On the 7th night, Dorian announced that it was time. "I've gathered enough support. Tomorrow night, we move against Constantine. I'll reclaim my throne, or I'll die trying." "Don't," Brielle said sharply. "Don't talk about dying. It's a possibility I must acknowledge. Constantine has had a week to solidify his power, to turn my court against me. The battle will be difficult." Dorian pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with fierce possessiveness. "If something happens to me, there are accounts set up in your name. Enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. The staff here has instructions to protect you, and Marcus at the Blood Den owes me a debt. He'll ensure you're safe from any vampire who might seek revenge against you for your connection to me." "Stop it," Brielle said, her voice breaking. "Stop talking like you're already dead. You're going to win because you're stronger and smarter than Constantine, and because you have me." She pulled back to look at him, her eyes fierce. "Take my blood, Dorian, before you go. Take enough to give you every advantage." "Brielle, no. I've taken from you too often already. The bond is already as strong as it can get. I feel you every moment of every day. And I know you feel me too. Taking more blood won't change that, but it might keep you alive, and that's all that matters to me." Dorian searched her face, and she felt his internal struggle through the bond, the desire to accept warring with his need to protect her. Finally, he nodded. "A little. Enough to strengthen me, but not enough to weaken you." This time, when she cut her wrist, it was with a knife Dorian handed her, and when he drank, it felt different from that first desperate feeding in her backyard. This was intimate and intentional, a gift freely given and gratefully received. She felt his pleasure at the taste of her, felt her own blood strengthening him through the bond. When he sealed the wound with his tongue, she pulled him down into a kiss that was all heat and need and fear of losing him. "Come back to me," she whispered against his lips. "Whatever happens, however long it takes, come back." "I will," Dorian promised. "I swear it on 5 centuries of existence, on every oath I've ever made. I will come back to you, Brielle." He left an hour later, disappearing into the night with 20 loyal vampires at his back, and Brielle was left alone in the vast mansion with nothing to do but wait and worry and feel his emotions through the bond like echoes of a battle she couldn't see. The fight was brutal. She felt every moment of it, Dorian's rage and determination, the spike of pain when blades found flesh, the cold satisfaction when enemies fell. Hours passed, night deepening toward dawn, and she paced the mansion's grand hall like a caged animal, unable to eat or rest or think of anything but the vampire who had become the center of her world in the space of a week. Just before sunrise, she felt something change. A surge of triumph through the bond, fierce and hot, followed by exhaustion so profound it nearly drove her to her knees. Then, finally, his voice in her mind, the first time he had tried to communicate that way. "It's done. Constantine is dead. I am king again." Brielle collapsed onto the nearest couch, relief making her shake. "Are you hurt? Nothing that won't heal." "I'm coming home. Wait for me." Home. He had called the mansion home and by extension called her home, and the word made her chest tight with emotions she was finally ready to name. Dorian returned as the sun was rising, slipping into the mansion's basement entrance with minutes to spare. Brielle was waiting for him, and when she saw him, blood-spattered and weary but alive, so blessedly alive, she threw herself into his arms with a sob. "You came back," she said, clinging to him. "I promised." His arms came around her, crushing her close. "I will always come back to you, Brielle. Always." They stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other in the early morning light filtering through the basement windows. Then Brielle pulled back enough to look at him, to see the cuts and bruises that were already beginning to heal. "Tell me everything," she said. So he did. He told her about the battle in his court, about the vampires who had stood with him and those who had fallen defending Constantine's stolen throne. He told her about the moment he had faced his former second-in-command, about the brief fight that had ended with Constantine's head separated from his body. "It's barbaric," Dorian said quietly. "My world, the violence we live by. You deserve better than a vampire king with blood on his hands." "I deserve someone who fights for what's his," Brielle corrected. "Someone who survives against impossible odds and comes home to me. That's you, Dorian. That's who you are." He looked at her for a long moment, his crimson eyes soft with something that made her heart race. "I love you," he said simply. "I know it's too soon, and I know the circumstances are complicated, but it's true. I fell in love with the widow who opened her wrist to save a dying stranger, and I love her more with every moment we spend together." Brielle felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they weren't entirely sad. "Thomas would have liked you," she said. "He would have understood. He was the kind of person who believed everyone deserved love, who thought life was too short to waste time being alone. He would have wanted me to be happy." "Are you happy?" Dorian asked softly. "With me? With this life I'm offering?" "I'm terrified," Brielle admitted, "of losing you the way I lost Thomas, of this world that's so much bigger and more dangerous than anything I've known. But yes, I'm happy. Happier than I thought I'd ever be again. I love you too, Dorian. I don't know how it happened so fast, but I do." He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, he said, "The court will need to meet you. My bonded mate, the human who saved their king's life. They'll want to know who you are, what you mean to me." "What do I mean to you?" Brielle asked. "Everything," Dorian said simply. "You are my heart, Brielle Pemberton. The reason I fought to reclaim my throne, the reason I'll continue to rule and protect my territories, not for power or pride, but so I can build a world safe enough for you to live in beside me. I'm human," she reminded him. "I'll age while you stay the same. Eventually, I'll die and you'll be alone again." Dorian's hand came up to cup her cheek. "Then I'll treasure every year, every day, every moment I have with you. And when the time comes, when you're old and I'm still young, I'll still love you with everything I am. That's the gift and curse of loving a mortal, knowing it can't last forever, makes every moment precious." "What if I wanted it to last forever?" Brielle asked quietly. "What if I wanted what Katerina refused? Would you turn me?" He went very still. "You would give up your humanity? Your mortal life?" "I gave up my old life the moment I cut my wrist for you. My house is destroyed. My normal existence is gone, and I can never go back to being the person I was before. But I don't want to go back. I want to move forward with you for as long as that's possible. And if that means becoming like you, then yes, I would choose that." "Not yet," Dorian said firmly. "Live as a human for a while longer. Experience my world from that perspective, understand what you would be giving up. If you still feel the same in a year, in 5 years, then we'll discuss it, but I won't take your mortality from you in a moment of passion or fear." Brielle nodded, understanding his caution even as part of her wanted to argue. He had loved and lost a human before. Of course, he would be careful about walking that path again. Okay, but Dorian, I'm not going anywhere. Whether I'm human or vampire, I'm yours for as long as you'll have me. Forever then, he said, and smiled at her with such warmth that it transformed his usually severe features. I'll have you forever, little widow. 3 months later, Brielle stood in the grand hall of Dorian's court, wearing a dress the color of midnight and surrounded by vampires who had bowed their heads to her when she entered. Dorian sat on his throne, literally a throne, carved from black stone and decorated with silver, and she stood beside him, her hand in his, as they presented a united front to the assembled court. "This is Brielle Pemberton," Dorian announced, his voice carrying through the chamber. "My bonded mate, the human who saved my life and helped me reclaim what was mine. She is under my protection, and any who threaten her threaten me. She is to be shown the respect due to a queen, for that is what she is to me." The vampires murmured among themselves, some looking curious, others skeptical, but all of them bowed in acknowledgement. Brielle felt Dorian's pride through the bond, and underneath that, his love, constant and steady and absolutely certain. Later, after the formal presentations were done, and they had retired to Dorian's private chambers in the castle that served as the seat of his power, Brielle looked around at the ancient stone walls and asked, "Do you ever miss being human?" Dorian considered the question, pulling her close so they stood together looking out over the city lights, visible from the tower window. "Sometimes. I miss the simplicity of a mortal life, the way everything felt urgent and important because time was limited. But I can't regret what I am, because being a vampire allowed me to live long enough to find you. If I had remained human, I would have died centuries before you were born, and we would never have met. So no, I don't regret my immortality, because it gave me you." "That's the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me," Brielle said, turning in his arms to kiss him. "And I include all of Thomas's poetry attempts in that assessment." Dorian laughed. "The sound rare and precious. I'm pleased to exceed your dead husband's romantic gestures, though I'll admit it's strange to compete with a memory." "You're not competing," Brielle assured him. "I love Thomas, and I'll always be grateful for the time we had together. He taught me what a good marriage could be, what real love felt like, and because of that, I was able to recognize it when I found it again with you. You're not his replacement, Dorian. You're something entirely different, and I love you for who you are, not because of who you're not." "You're going to make me believe in happy endings," Dorian said softly, resting his forehead against hers. "After 500 years of cynicism, you're going to make me believe that love can last." "Good," Brielle replied, "because I plan to spend the rest of my human life proving it to you, and maybe, eventually, the rest of my vampire life too, if that offer still stands." "It stands," Dorian promised. "Whenever you're ready, I'll turn you myself. Not out of fear of losing you, but because you choose it, because you want forever as much as I do." "I do," Brielle said, and the words echoed with the weight of a vow. "I choose you, Dorian Urasov. I choose this life, this world, this love, for as long as I have, and maybe longer than that." He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of all the promises they were making to each other. Outside the window, the city sprawled beneath them, full of humans who didn't know vampires existed, who lived their normal lives without understanding the supernatural world that existed alongside their own. But Brielle knew, and she wouldn't have it any other way. She had been a widow, lost in grief and loneliness, going through the motions of a life that felt empty and meaningless. Then she had found a dying vampire in her backyard, had opened her wrist and changed everything. Some people would call it fate. Others would call it coincidence, a random meeting that happened to change 2 lives. But Brielle thought of it as something simpler and more profound. It was a choice. She had chosen compassion over fear, connection over loneliness, love over grief. And that choice had given her everything. Years later, 5 of them, the time Dorian had asked her to wait, Brielle stood in the same tower chamber and made another choice. She chose immortality, chose to become a vampire, chose forever with the man she loved. The transformation was painful, 3 days of agony as her body died and was reborn, But Dorian never left her side. He held her through every moment, whispering promises and reassurances, and when she opened her eyes as a vampire for the first time, he was the first thing she saw. Her vision was sharper now, colors more vivid, and she could hear the heartbeats of humans in the city far below. But the most significant change was the bond between them. What had been a golden thread was now a rope, thick and strong and unbreakable, binding them together in ways that transcended the physical. "How do you feel?" Dorian asked, his crimson eyes searching her face. "Alive," Brielle said, and laughed at the irony. "I feel more alive than I have since Thomas died. Is that strange?" "No. You're reborn, remade. It's natural to feel the intensity of it." He pulled her close, and she marveled at how their temperatures now matched, how his cool skin no longer felt cold against hers. "You're beautiful, Brielle. You were always beautiful, but now you're breathtaking." She looked at herself in the mirror. Vampires could see their reflections, despite what the stories said, and was startled by what she saw. Her skin had paled, taking on the same white luminescence as Dorian's, and her dark hair was now threaded with white, as though the vampire blood in her veins had bleached it from within. Her eyes were still her own, though brighter somehow, more intense. "I look like I belong in your world now," she said. "You've always belonged in my world," Dorian corrected. "From the moment you chose compassion over fear, you were meant to be here." The transformation simply made visible what was always true. They went to the court that night, Brielle walking beside Dorian as his equal now, no longer a fragile human under his protection, but a vampire queen in her own right. The assembled vampires bowed to them both, and when Dorian placed a crown on her white-streaked hair, a delicate thing of silver and black diamonds, she felt the weight of it like a promise fulfilled. "My queen," Dorian said, loud enough for the entire court to hear. "My mate, my love, my partner in all things, I give you Brielle Yarosoff, and I warn all who would challenge us that we are stronger together than any force that might stand against us." Brielle looked out at the sea of pale faces, at the vampires who had once been strangers and were now her subjects, her people. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from grief-stricken widow to vampire queen, from a woman who had lost everything to a woman who had found anew everything she hadn't known she needed. "Thank you," she said to the court, her voice carrying with supernatural strength, "for accepting me, for supporting your king when he needed you most, for welcoming a human into your midst. I know I'm unusual, that my path to this throne was unconventional, but I promise you that I'll serve alongside Dorian with all the strength I have. We'll build a court worthy of your loyalty, a territory safe for all our kind." The vampires responded with a roar of approval, and Brielle felt Dorian's pride and love through the bond so strongly it made her chest ache. Later, when they were alone again in their chambers, he pulled her close and said, "I never thought I would have this. A partner, a true queen, someone who chose me not for power or position, but simply because she loved me." "I'll keep choosing you," Brielle promised. "Every day for the rest of eternity, I'll wake up and choose you." "And I'll choose you," Dorian replied, sealing the vow with a kiss. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were vampires who resented a former human sitting beside their king, territories that had to be defended, and the constant political maneuvering that came with ruling a supernatural kingdom. But through it all, Brielle and Dorian stood together, their bond unbreakable, their love growing deeper with each passing decade. Brielle never forgot Thomas, never stopped being grateful for the life they had shared, but she also never regretted the choice she had made that October evening when she had found a dying vampire in her backyard. She had opened her wrist to save a stranger, and in doing so, she had saved herself, had found a purpose and a love that transcended everything she had thought possible. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she would paint. Her art had evolved over the years, her vampire vision allowing her to see and capture colors no human eye could perceive. But the core of it remained the same. She painted love and loss, joy and sorrow, the full spectrum of emotion that made existence meaningful, whether you had a human lifespan or an immortal one. Dorian would watch her paint, his presence a comfort and an inspiration, and she would feel his love through the bond like a constant heartbeat, steady and sure. They had forever now, all the time in the world, but they never took a single moment for granted. Every night was precious, every year a gift, and they lived their immortal lives with the urgency and passion of two people who had both known loss and chosen to love anyway. In the end, that was the truth of their story. Not that a widow had saved a vampire king, though she had, but the two lonely souls had found each other in the darkness and chosen to build a light together. A light that would shine for centuries to come, a beacon of hope proving that even in a world of monsters and shadows, love could flourish and endure. And they lived, truly lived, happily ever after in all the ways that mattered together, in love and absolutely, irrevocably content with the choice they had made when a widow opened her wrist to save a dying stranger and accidentally found her forever.